Every morning at 07:55, Edward Miles radios the USS Arizona. The battleship has been at the bottom of Pearl Harbor since December 7th, 1941, and the Arizona still answers. Edward has worked night security here for 14 years. The Navy hires civilians because active sailors won't take this duty. There are rules about what you can log, what you can photograph, and when you must stay away. The strangest rule involves a radio call to a frequency marked Arizona. At exactly 07:55, Edward presses the transmit button and keys a simple status check. Every morning, a voice crackles through the speaker. A young man's voice, faint with static, perfectly clear. It has been going on for decades. Before Edward, before his trainer Henderson. No one knows how long. The response is always the same. Edward logs it, as instructed. He does not engage further. He never has. But every watchman wonders what would happen if someone broke the rules. The first rule: do not log movement on the water above the Arizona between 0750 and 0810. The second: do not photograph the oil sheen. It rises from the wreck daily. The third: at 07:55 exactly, radio Arizona for a status check and log the response. These rules are not in any official manual, but every watchman inherits them from the one before. The movement is there. Smears of oil, dark shapes beneath the surface. But you do not record its point a camera at the sheen, and something reacts. Those who have tried destroyed the photographs immediately. The voice always says, Arizona, all hands accounted for, watch report, nothing to report. Edward writes it down, word for word, and signs the log. Every day the same. He does not ask why. The rules are clear. They keep him safe, but the question lingers. What exactly are these rules protecting him from? Edward remembers his first night shift. Carl Henderson, the senior watchman, stood in the booth and handed him a worn binder with no cover.
Rule 4. The response will be a male voice saying, Arizona, all hands accounted for, watch report, nothing to report. You log it, you do not engage further. No matter what you hear after, you do not reply. Not a word, not even a click.
He turned a page to a calendar and pointed to December 7th.
Rule 5. On December 7th, every year, you do not patrol the harbor perimeter between 07:55 and 08:15. You stay inside, radio off. You do not look. You do not listen.
Why that date?
Because that's the morning the world ended for them. That's all you need to know. Ever.
Henderson didn't elaborate. He closed the binder and walked out, leaving the rules hanging in the air like a verdict. Edward stood alone with the radio and the calendar, already dreading December 7th. The next morning, before sunrise, Edward sat alone in the booth. The radio was off. The clock on the wall ticked towards 07:55.
Just follow the rules. Do not engage. Do not ask.
At 07:55 exactly, he reached over and pressed the transmit button.
Arizona, this is watch status check, over.
Static hissed from the speaker. A pause. Then a click. A young man's voice, faint with static but perfectly clear, replied, Arizona, all hands accounted for, watch report, nothing to report.
That's not a recording.
Edward's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He wrote the response in the log exactly as Henderson had shown him. He set the pen down and stared at the radio. The booth felt colder. The rules weren't stories. Somewhere below the oil sheen, men were still answering, and the voice had been real. That evening, Edward found Henderson in the supply room, sorting batteries in the dim light. He couldn't let the voice go.
You said not to ask questions, but I need to know. Who answers that radio?
He sighed and set down the batteries. Boys, just boys, Miles. Some of them were 18.
He explained that the 1,177 men on the Arizona never received the order to abandon their watch. They still stand it.
The Navy considers them still on active duty. They are not deserters. They are not ghosts. They are at their posts.
Active duty. For over 70 years.
Edward pictured young sailors in dress whites, forever watching the harbor they died to protect.
And if they ever stop,
Then the watch ends. And whatever comes after, you don't want to be on deck.
He turned away, leaving Edward with the weight of a duty that wasn't his, but now felt like it could be. In the years that followed, Edward never missed a morning call. The ritual became as steady as the tide. Sometimes, between 0750 and 0810, he saw movement on the water. Dark shapes, slow and deliberate.
Rule 1. Don't log it. Don't even look too long.
Once, he saw a tourist aiming a camera at the oil sheen. Edward walked over and covered the lens with his palm.
Delete it. You don't photograph the water here.
The tourist deleted the photos, spooked. Edward didn't explain. The rules never came with explanations.
Something in that sheen doesn't belong to this side.
Year after year, the routine held, the same voice, the same voice, the same log entry, the same silence after.
Sometimes duty is just showing up for something that can't be explained.
But beneath the routine, the question lingered. What would happen if the watch ever broke? One night, a naval officer arrived unannounced at the watch booths, requesting to review the security logs. The officer flipped through the logbook and stopped at the entries marked Arizona. He frowned.
Don't break. Don't say a word. Just follow the rules.
Edward opened his mouth to answer, but Henderson's voice cut in from the doorway.
Routine communications check. We log it for the record. Nothing more.
The officer studied Henderson's face, then the logbook. He closed it without another word. He departed, leaving behind a silence that felt like a held breath.
We just lied to the Navy for 1,100 men who can't speak for themselves.
That night, Edward sat alone in the booth, the weight of the secret pressing harder than ever. The rules weren't just superstition, they were a pact, and he was now part of it. And he was now part of it. On December 7th, every year, the shipyard felt different. The air thicker, the water darker.
Rule 5. Radio off. Curtains drawn. Don't even look at the harbor.
He could hear the distant crackle through other watchmen's radios. The roll call, the response.
Arizona, all hands accounted for. They're still there. Still standing.
He sat in the booth, the lights off, listening to the silence that followed. The minutes crept by.
77 years. Some of them were 18. Forever 18.
Outside, the sun rose. The forbidden window passed. Another anniversary without incident.
But what happens out there? What do they do on this day?
He never looked, he never asked. But the question followed him every December. The pact held, but Edward could feel the weight shifting, slowly, like the tide before a storm. On a quiet shift, Carl Henderson set his cap on the desk and told Edward it was time.
23 years. That's enough. You know the rules. You are the watch now.
He slid a worn logbook across the table, then a set of keys. The passing was simple, final.
Whatever happens, Miles, never break the 5th rule. You hear me? Not on December 7th. Not ever.
I won't.
Henderson stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the booth for the last time. Edward stood alone in the booth, the logs and keys before him. The weight of the watch settled on his shoulders.
He's gone. The entire chain just rests on me now.
No one else knew the full truth. No one else could carry it. The pact was his alone now. Outside, the harbor lay still. But the voice would come again in the morning, and Edward would be ready. Weeks after Henderson left, Edward began organizing the old filing cabinet in the booth. At the back of a drawer, he found a folder marked classified, its edges yellowed with age. Inside was a memorandum dated January 12, 1942. The header read, "Continuing watched status."
They kept it on record. The Navy never listed them as lost.
The document listed all 1,177 names. Beside each, the designation, active, special duty, assigned until further notice. At the bottom, a faded stamp pressed into the paper. Effective upon receipt. No expiration. No expiration.
This isn't folklore. The Navy ordered them to stand watch, and the order never ended.
Edward sat frozen, the paper trembling in his hands. The rules weren't just tradition, they were compliance.
Who has the authority to relieve them? Who even knows they're still here?
He folded the memo carefully and placed it back in the folder. The ritual had just become far more dangerous. Over the following weeks, Edward couldn't stop thinking about the memo. The Arizona was not just a ghost, it was an assignment. He dug through old logbooks, looking for patterns. Some entries were decades old, written in Henderson's own hand, and before him, others.
There are notes here about other ships, other places, standing watches like ours.
Faded references to battleships and destroyers lost in every ocean, each with a watchman who radioed and received a reply. The Arizona was part of a global network, a secret protocol that had never been rescinded.
How many others are out there? Radioing ghosts every morning, never speaking a word.
The memorandum's language was explicit until further notice. That notice had never come. Edward sat back, the booth feeling smaller. The rules weren't just protection, they were part of a longer duty, one that stretched far beyond Pearl Harbor.
And if the watch is eternal, what happens when a watchman finally listens too closely?
The harbor outside was calm, but Edward couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, not just below the water, but everywhere. That night, Edward dreamed of water, not the harbor, a deeper, darker sea where shadows moved beneath the surface.
They're calling out. I can hear them, but I can't see their faces.
He woke, gasping, the sound of his own radio static fading in his ears. The next morning, the roll call felt heavier. The voice seemed closer, clearer, as if it came from just outside the glass.
They're not just answering a radio. They're aware of me.
He began to dread the sound of the transmitter, the click, the static, the young man's voice that never aged.
What if they need to be relieved? What if the watch is a cage, not a duty?
At night, he heard things that weren't there. Footsteps on the pier, a distant bell, whispers beneath the oil sheen.
I need to know. Whatever the fifth rule is hiding, I need to see it.
The anniversary was coming, and for the first time, Edward wasn't sure he would follow the rule. In the week before the anniversary, the harbor air grew stale. The oil sheen shimmered with a feverish light. The slick pulsed with impossible colors, purples and greens, swirling like a living thing. At the edge of his vision, dark forms drifted below. He never looked directly.
They're waiting. Something is different this year.
The radio hummed even when off. The clock ticked louder each day.
Henderson warned me, but they're still sailors. They deserve to be heard.
On the evening of December 6th, he stood at the window and watched the water, his decision forming.
Tomorrow morning, I am breaking the fifth rule. For the first time, I'll listen.
He turned from the window, the weight of Henderson's warning pressing against the pull of the unknown. That night, he did not sleep. The fifth rule would be broken. Whatever came, he would face it. At 0700 hours on December 7th, 2018, Edward sat in the booth with the radio already on. His hands were steady, but his pulse was not. The clock on the wall ticked towards 7:55. He had been counting down the minutes all night.
This is madness. Turn it off. Walk away.
Instead, he reached over and keyed the microphone. Rule 3 overruled the others now.
Arizona, this is watch. Status check. Over.
The familiar voice came through, just as it had for 77 years. Arizona, all hands accounted for. Watch report, nothing to report. Edward logged the entry. Then, instead of switching off the radio, he leaned closer and waited.
Forgive me, Henderson. I need to hear what comes next.
The booth was silent, except for the hum of the radio. Somewhere out on the water, the sun was starting to rise. Edward crossed the line. Whatever happened now, he would witness it. For 3 minutes, the speaker hummed with dead air. Then, at 0758, the static sharpened into a click. The same young man's voice returned, but for the first time in 77 years, the words changed. The voice said, calm as a watchman reporting a passing ship, "Watch This is Arizona. Be advised. We will be relieved this morning. End of watch.
That's not in the rule book.
Edward's pen hovered above the logbook. The ink bled into the paper as he forgot to lift it.
They know. They know I am listening. They were waiting for this day.
The radio fell silent. No static, no click. Just the hum of the booth. Just the hum of the booth. On the wall, the clock ticked toward 08:10. The forbidden window was almost closed. Edward stared at the radio, his hand trembling. The words echoed, relieved this morning. End of watch. For the first time, he understood what Henderson had been afraid of. The watch was ending, and he was still in the booth. At 08:08, a flash tore across the water above the Arizona. No sound, no shockwave, just a silent, violent light. Edward scrambled to the window. The explosion bloomed and vanished in the same breath, like a silent film. The water above the wreck rippled once, a perfect circle spreading outward, then lay still. No alarms sounded. No instruments registered anything. The shipyard slept. At 08:10, Edward grabbed the transmitter mic. His voice cracked as he keyed it.
Arizona, this is watch status check. Over.
Static. Just static. No click, no voice.
Arizona, this is watch. Come in.
Nothing. The frequency was dead. For the first time in 77 years, the Arizona did not answer. The watch had ended. But the silence that followed was worse than any ghost. The next morning, Edward dragged himself back to the booth. He hadn't slept. The clock on the wall seemed louder than before. At 07:55, he lifted the transmitter mic. His hands steady, but his stomach hollow.
Arizona, this is watch status check. Over.
Static filled the speaker. No click, no pause. Just endless hiss.
Arizona, come in.
Nothing. The frequency that had spoken for 77 years was silent. Edward set the transmitter down. He opened the logbook to the day's entry.
Line after line, year after year. And now there's nothing left to write.
He closed the logbook and sat there as the sun rose over the harbor, a ritual broken. The watch had ended. And for the first time in 14 years, Edward had no purpose. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at Edward's station, marked official correspondence. No phone call, no meeting, just a form. It stated his position as night watchman was terminated, effective immediately, with no cited cause.
They know I broke the 5th rule. But how much do they know?
A junior officer arrived to collect his keys and badge. The exchange was silent, routine. The logbook was left on the desk, the last entry frozen on December 7th, 2018. No one asked about the Arizona. No one mentioned the morning call. The ritual was erased. Edward walked out of the booth for the last time, the door clicking shut behind him.
14 years. The boys are gone, and I am just a civilian again.
He stood at the edge of the dock, the water dark and still. No sheen, no shapes, just silence. The Navy had sealed the door. Edward Miles was no longer a watchman. The secret had swallowed him. At home, Edward kept a small digital recorder hidden in a drawer. On the morning of December 7th, he had pressed record. He told no one. The recording was his alone, the only proof that the watch had truly ended. Now, alone in his apartment, he cupped the recorder in his palm and pressed play. Static hissed from the tiny speaker, then a click, and then the voice. And then the voice, "Watch, this is Arizona. Be advised, we will be relieved this morning. End of watch." The words echoed, unchanged.
77 years, and that was their final message. Not a cry for help, just a report.
He listened to it again and again. The voice was young, steady, the same one he had answered for 14 years.
They were relieved. But who relieved them? And where do sailors go after a 77-year watch?
He never discussed it publicly, never played it for anyone, but he kept it close, a relic of a broken rule. Every night he wondered if he should destroy it. but the silence of the Arizona was louder. In the weeks that followed, Edward turned the word over in his mind, relieved. Not disbanded, not retired, relieved.
The memorandum said, until further notice. That notice might not have been an end. It could have been an order to reassign.
He remembered the ghostly silhouettes on the modern destroyer deck, sailors in old uniforms standing where they didn't belong. The other watches he'd read about in the logbooks, ships lost in every ocean, all still answering their radios.
They weren't set free, they were moved. Like any active duty unit, they received new orders.
He thought of the silent explosion that morning. No sound, no trace, not a destruction, but a departure.
I know where they went. The shoreline, the dry dock. It fits, but I won't write the name.
He never spoke of it publicly. The recordings stayed hidden. But late at night he pictured them, forever 18, forever on watch, now standing guard somewhere else.
The Arizona didn't fall silent. She just changed frequencies.
The watch was not over. It had simply moved beyond his reach, and the men who stood it were still at their posts. In the years after, Edward visited the Arizona Memorial on quiet afternoons. He never signed a guest book or spoke to the staff.
I come here because the silence is the same as it was in the booth. Just water and wind.
The memorial's white structure rose above the water, a marker not of death, but of duty still being performed.
They're out there, somewhere. I won't name the place, but I know they're standing watch.
He stood at the railing, looking down at the water where the oil sheen no longer rose. No shapes moved beneath the surface. The recording remained hidden in his apartment, a black box of a miracle he could never explain.
I broke the fifth rule, and I lost the ritual, but I was given the truth.
He never spoke of it publicly. The story would have sounded like madness, but it was his to carry. The harbor was often calm. Sometimes he caught the faint smell of oil, but it was only memory. Edward Miles was no longer a watchman. But somewhere the watch continued, and he was the only one who knew. He never showed the recording to anyone. Not even Henderson, who passed away a year later, never knowing the message had changed. On certain nights, when a carrier departed Pearl Harbor, Edward would stand at the fence and watch the crew line the rails.
Are any of them up there? 1,100 men in dress whites forever, on watch, blended in with the living.
He knew it was irrational, but he also knew the Arizona had answered a radio for 77 years. The recording remained in its drawer, the file untouched. He had named it Arizona, End of Wetch. .wive. Sometimes, in the silence of his apartment, he would press play and let the voice speak, just to prove it was real. And then he would stop it before the static returned, leaving the words hanging in the air, relieved. End of watch. He never sought another security job. The watch at Pearl Harbor had been his last. On the anniversary, he would go to the memorial and stand among the families. He never told them what he knew. And somewhere, out on the dark water, the Arizona was silent, but the watchmen it had sent onward were not.